Hello, everyone. This is Hoa welcoming you back to my storytelling channel. First of all, I've got a little frog living in my throat, so my voice isn't the same as how you are used to, and please forgive me for this. But I am here to read the first chapter of The Emperor's Concubine for your enjoyment. So I hope that you will tune in and listen and see where this story shall take us.
This town is quiet when it's late, yeah. This town is quiet when the night is getting close. I'm outside, gonna stay here. I'm outside until you tell me to stop. I'm being so dramatic. I'm always being so dramatic. This town is quiet when it's late, yeah.
The castle walls held an eerie glare as Captain of the Guard Easton rode on his horse toward the entrance. The torches were lit, and the flames were dancing in the wind, reminding how wickedly cold it had gotten with the 10th month of the year. As he neared, the men-at-arms parted and began to open the drawbridge, letting him through. The horse neighed, bringing its legs up as he made the final jump through to the dirt ground of the palace grounds. "Easton returns!" voices shouted as he steadied the horse and began riding toward where the crowd gathered. Easton stopped his horse short of the entrance and jumped off, handing the reins to the master's stable, and rounded the animal when the Emperor made his entrance down the stairs. Easton dropped to one knee and greeted with glee. "Emperor Lionel, your servant greets you with longevity to life." Emperor Lionel smiled, and his handsome face glowed as he walked down the stairs. "Rise, Easton. Walk with me." He rose and fell into step with the Emperor as they began walking toward the Pavilion of the East. "Tell me of your travels to home," Lionel said as he adjusted the sleeve of his black tunic. "I should hope you found a maiden to wed." Smiling, Easton replied, "Your Majesty, maidens are for hopeful men who serve no one. I serve only you." Laughing, Lionel said, "My, you certainly have learned a word or two to mend my heart and soul. If you are looking for merits, I shall give it." "Your Majesty, the things I wish for are merely just your contentment." They reached the pavilion, and Easton removed the letter arrangement from his sleeve. He held it before the Emperor and bowed his head. "Your Majesty, my travels this time led me to a coast far from the palace walls. There, I exchanged arrangements for marriage for your sons in the future, but the lord of the city wanted none other than you. This is the painting of a maiden from their town who they believe would be a great asset to our kingdom." Lionel took the painting from him and opened it. The gentle face of the maiden looked back at him with soft curls that framed her face. He looked up at Easton and smiled. "What name do I call her by?" "Her name is Janive, and the magic comes in her hands as she is a healer. She was raised by an old shaman and has been of pure heart and soul." "Hmm, a shaman raised her, huh? She comes with healing hands?" "Yes," Easton replied. "Did you see her when you went there?" Shaking his head, he replied, "No, I did not." "And if I were to refuse?" Easton bowed his head. "Military support will withdraw, and silence on many borders from trappers who trade. I understand your Majesty's decision made a decade ago, but I deliver the message to you firsthand on the hope that you will understand." Lionel smiled and reached out a hand to touch the cheek on the painting, and then he looked up. "Send word, Easton, to have her come here for a proper visit. I shall speak to the Empress tonight, and we shall send an envoy to have her brought. If it is my hand they seek for marriage, then my hand it will be." "Consider it done, your Majesty." The bedroom was warm and comforting as Lionel entered where the smell of jasmine hid his nostrils. Sitting in the large basin of jasmine-filled waters was his wife and empress, Paloma, who sat with the water up to her shoulders, her black hair piled up on her head. He walked to her and laid a hand on her shoulder, gently waking her up. She made a small noise of awakening, and he knelt down beside her while dipping his hand into the water. "Your Majesty," she purred almost. "You are late in coming tonight." What kept you? Political meetings, he whispered. She rolled her eyes almost. Political meetings. State affairs. What must I do to make your eyes turn solely to me, your majesty? Must I strip naked and stand before your prime ministers to gather your attention? Laughing, he replied, If you were to do that, I'm afraid that the entire world would see what a jealous man I would become. I implore you to keep your body as a temple for me. Paloma smiled and turned around, her lips catching his for a brief moment, before she leaned against the basin and looked up at him with her dark eyes. Something bothers you. Tell me. He took a deep breath. A harem, hair in our palace walls. Paloma's face paled, and she turned away. I thought, when we wed a decade ago, a harem was promised not to be built by your late father as long as I gave you sons. Do we not have 4 strapping young sons in the palace halls who will one day grow to lead? Lionel took a deep breath and touched her cheeks. Apologies, my empress, but the state affairs are pounding on my doors. If I do not agree, military support will cease, and so would trapper trades. Paloma rose from the water and wrapped a towel around herself. She came to him as he stood and took his hand. Your Majesty, a hard position the state has put you in to build a harem for your kingdom. As a woman, do I even dare to go against their thoughts? What will I get out of this if I were to beseech you to reconsider? Lionel reached out and took her hand in his, rubbing his fingers over her knuckles lightly. My empress, you stand above all who dares to enter this palace wall. Your word will have the final hold to everything, and if argued, punishment will be yours to hand out. Paloma turned away and picked up a robe to wrap around herself. She let her hair down and fluffed it as she turned around to face him. I have never wanted a harem. I just wanted you, your majesty. I already share you with the state affairs and political meetings, and now I must share you with another woman who will bore you heirs. How do you expect me to take this news, your majesty? Lionel took her hand gently and pulled her toward him, his eyes never leaving hers. You are dearest, always to me, my lady, no matter who may come into the palace halls seeking a hand to warm my bed. The thought of you will never be far from me, and the truth is that if I had a say in this, I would deny it completely. But I cannot, for I still require their military powers. Forgive me, my lady. I have never wanted to hurt you. She pulled her hand away. You do not want to hurt me. What do you call this? Why must we fight over this? Because it is something I cannot control, she cried with heated anger. Once this harlot comes waltzing into the palace walls, I will be forgotten by you. Her flesh is young and supple, which I am not, and she will become competition. Lionel shook his head, and a smile graced his face. No, my empress. Never will she be able to compete with you. You are everything I hold dear, and more so, you own my heart. No one can take that place but you. Remember your words, your majesty.
기다렸어요. 오랜 시간을 밤이 지나고 빛이 쏟아지길 삶이라는 건 답이 없었고 하루하루가 버거웠던 날들 눈물 짓던 시간.
Geneviève's heart thumped against her chest as a waterbend rushed past her hands. Raindrops began falling onto her flesh as she looked up at the sky. The winds picked up, and she pushed back her black strands as she stood up from the ground. The world around her began to darken, and she stood, her hand casting protection over her head as big rain splatters began falling down. River! She cried as she ran toward the hut where her foster mother was cooking over the stove. The woman's long, curly white hair was around her shoulders as she looked up from the flames of the stove. Janive rushed in as it began to pour down, and she grabbed a hold of the older woman's hand. Rain has come, River. Come, let us dance in the rain. Janive said. River's eyes glowed, and she stood to follow the young woman out where the rain began pouring. The sound of thunder roared across the sky as lightning flashed through the universe. A chant echoed from River's lips as the two women began dancing and singing together. But the sound of their laughter subsided when they heard horse hooves coming toward them. Janive was yanked back behind River as the horse stopped short of them, and a tall man with dark hair got down from the animal. He wore a postal messenger uniform, and he came toward them with a smile. River and Janive, I come with a message from the kingdom. Emperor Lionel has sent an envoy to come collect young Janive in 3 days' time. The Lord of Harem has chosen Janive as the bride gift to the emperor. River gasped in shock. My Janive? Yes. Janive came out from behind her foster mother and asked, Can I deny this arrangement? No, you may not. To deny the emperor is to defy a nation's decision, and the result is your death. Remember, 3 days' time. He smiled at them once more and got back on his horse to go. Janive ran toward the hut where she began stripping the wet clothes from her body. River followed suit shortly, and with a wave of her hand made the flames burn higher to create warmth around the small hut. Janive, River said, what say you to this marriage arrangement? She turned around, her eyes glowing with anger. What can I say? You heard the messenger. Death is my only other option. River smiled and came to brush a strand away from her face. What have I always taught you? Pausing, Janive replied, Control your emotions and collect applause as you live. Exactly, my dear girl. Although this arrangement comes as quite a shock, the future is yours to hold. There is a presence in this marriage that will open up a chapter in your life. You will come to learn great things. Janive frowned. River, why do I sense that you are not entirely honest with me? Smiling, the older woman replied, Because I am not. Time is a foe right now, not a friend. When it turns familiar and liking, you and I both shall speak again about your purpose and what it means for you. There is something that is changing within you, and only by marriage can it be activated. You will soon learn what it is. River, you speak in surrounding riddles that has me wondering if I should be fearful of this new husband. River smiled and touched her chin. If anything, this new husband shall run for his life if he should dare hurt you. And then she walked to the shelf and pulled out a necklace with a tiny heart-shaped locket. She placed it around Janive's neck and smiled, clasping it together in the back. Dearest, this is yours, given to me by your mother. The day you wed is the day you will become a true woman of the ancient Hulan tribe. You will wake to yourself a completely different person, all feelings heightened, and a very long life ahead of you. Janive frowned. I don't understand. Smiling, River replied, In due time, all shall be revealed for you. For now, let us prepare you for the bridal envoy that is ready to bring you to your new home. Empress Paloma adjusted the small white flower on her hair, and inside, her heart was trembling with fear and hatred. When she wed the emperor, who was a mere prince at the time, the late emperor had agreed that no harem would be built, as long as she would give him sons. So she became pregnant as fast as she could, so that nothing could be used against her. The late emperor had been content with how soon her belly had rounded and applauded her being such a fertile woman. When he took his last breath, she was sad to see him go, but also happy that he had spoken of no harem in the palace walls. But now, another thing was rising, and it was going to be bringing a strange woman to her court, a woman who would threaten her marriage and steal her husband's warmth. How could she pretend he didn't hurt? How could she smile when all she wanted to do was cry? Last night, her husband had held her all night long in his arms, for fear of never having the chance to do so again, or if he truly wanted to, she was not sure. She had learned to love him with all of her heart and soul, and there was no space, not even a speck of breath, between her heart and his. But she was afraid that as a man, he would not be able to keep his words he'd promised her. Look at what had already happened. A harem was forced upon his hand. How would he turn away a younger, more beautiful woman? She'd yet to gaze upon her, this concubine, as the prime ministers called her. Waverly, her handmaiden, walked in with two long braids down her shoulders, carrying a basin of rose water. She set it down and handed a soft wet towel to her. Empress, the day is ready for you to make an appearance. The Prime Ministers all await your presence at the lobby to welcome the wedding envoy. She turned to the girl and asked, And the Emperor? Where is he? Your Majesty is already dressed, waiting for the arrival of the envoy with all the loyal subjects. Paloma sighed and shut her eyes. So, it seems I am the only one absent. It will appear as if I am narrow-minded if I were to walk in this late. Empress, I will make sure it is not so. Never mind. Help me dress. The gown was a golden one with big red flowers on the shoulders, leading to a wide train complete with bell-shaped sleeves. Once it wrapped around her body, she walked ahead with Waverly behind her. As they took the walk down the stairs to the lobby hall, where her husband was sitting at the throne, his body wearing the traditional wedding attire of white. He looked as handsome today as he did 10 years ago, when they first wed. A sharp pain nestled into her heart, as she tried to avoid the emotion that made her want to sob. The Prime Minister Sebastian, an older man near his 60s, stepped forward wearing a white robe and bowed. Your Empress is late in arrival. I trust everything is well. A mere wardrobe accident from me, Waverly said. Sebastian smiled and bowed. Please take your seat beside the Emperor, as word has been sent that the envoy will arrive shortly. Paloma walked to take the seat beside her husband, and he reached over to take her hand. The gesture made her smile, and her heart warmed instantly. Loud horns began blowing in the distance, and horse hooves were heard. A green flag was seen with a lone rider in the front, and then Easton appeared shortly after with a large brown envoy with red curtains surrounding the windows. Once they neared, her husband stood and let her hand go. Easton dropped from his horse and walked up the stairs to where he knelt down on one knee. Greetings, Your Majesty. The wedding envoy has arrived. What would Your Majesty like for Lady Genevieve to do? Easton asked. Have her enter, Lionel said. Very well, Your Majesty. Easton stood, turned, and walked back where he relayed the message, and Paloma stood up watching as the curtains opened. Easton offered his arm, and a hand decorated with jewels reached out. To her utter surprise and envy, a woman of an exotic beauty stepped out, with long black curls that cascaded down her back. Pearls of all kinds covered her head, and it rained down each of her curls, making her movements a loud announcement. She wore a deep red and black exquisite gown, cut deep in the front, showing more cleavage than needed, and a tight, curvy body with hips that moved like the slither of a snake. Her eyes were dark, majestic, and foggy with a glare that held you with intoxication. She was literally a drug to every single man in the palace. Paloma turned to find her husband's eyes took in what stood before him, and jealousy hit her in the heart. And then she saw his Adam's apple moved as he swallowed down the desire smoking in his eyes. The woman made her way with Easton to the lobby and dropped a curtsy. Your Majesty, Janive of the Hayam Hulan tribe greets you and the Empress, she said in a soft voice. To her surprise, her husband walked on the steps and then began circling her as she lowered her long lashes. He finally stopped and walked until his shoulders nearly touched hers. Janive. What a strange name, he whispered. It is the only one I have, she replied. I adore it. And then he stepped away. Prime Minister Sebastian, state in the records that today is Concubine Janive's arrival to the palace walls. Yes, Your Majesty. And then he turned to a young girl, a young servant who was standing in the corner with a pitcher in her hands. She was new and untouched, Paloma knew, by the color white she wore. You, there, he said. What is your name? She stepped forward. Your Majesty, I am called Camilla. Smiling, he replied. Camilla, this day forward, you are to serve the concubine. Only you are allowed to enter her chambers when she bathes and sleeps. The servant put down the pitcher and walked forward, bowing. Your Majesty, your order has been heard and accepted. Good. The girl walked to stand beside Janive, and Paloma walked down the steps to stand beside the emperor. He finally turned and remembered her presence. Ah, Concubine Genevieve, this is the holy Empress Paloma. You would dine with her 2 days a week and learn palace etiquette from her. Janive bowed down to her. Empress Paloma, this concubine respectfully acknowledges your grace and beauty. Paloma forced a smile. You are a grand sight for the eyes. Tell me, what talent do you have? She looked up with heavily hooded eyes. Talent? Paloma smiled and reached a hand to touch the emperor's arm. Yes, talent. If you are gifted to the emperor as a concubine and his first lady in the harem, you must be quite talented. Janive lowered her gaze. Talent is absent from me. Nonsense. You're too modest, I'm afraid. Do you paint? She shook her head. Dance, perhaps. Again she shook her head. Then you must be a singer. No, Empress. I am none of that. Empress, Lionel said with clenched teeth, what are you seeking? Paloma smiled. I am merely seeking what she can bring to your harem as your concubine, and to better serve your people. She was chosen out of many, therefore she must be incredibly gifted. Janive finally lifted her head up. If it will please your Empress, then I will speak of my gift. Please, speak. She turned to Easton and asked, May I borrow your sword? Easton lifted his face to the Emperor. Your Majesty. Give it, Lionel instructed. Easton removed the sword and gave it to her. In one instant, she unsheathed it and slashed across her own arm. Everyone began screaming, but she simply gathered up the blood from her wounds, smeared it across her arm, and blew 3 times, whispering an ancient dialect. Anoshka matin yishu boka sing, halor moka han sing yishu, lamola sigulu. The blood flow immediately stopped, and she dropped the sword on the ground, clinging loudly. Paloma's eyes widened, and she took a step back. What witchcraft is that? Smiling, Janive replied, Witchcraft? No, my Empress. Witchcraft would demand an item from someone to send a spell. This is a healing chant ancestors bestowed to me upon birth. Suddenly, Lionel burst out laughing and began clapping his hands. You are truly a healer. How the Lord Almighty have heard my prayers. Easton, take concubine Janive to rest and change attire. Then we shall celebrate with wine and food. Thank you for tuning in. Chapter 2 will be released shortly.
This town is quiet when it's late here. This town is quiet when the night is getting close. I'm outside, gonna stay here. I'm outside until you tell me to stop. I'm being so dramatic.